everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Data Standard Audio Experience. Today on our show, we have JD Martindale, a director of data science from Anthem. And today we're speaking about cognitive AI and NLP. So welcome to the show, JD. It's so great to have you today.
Thanks, Kat.
Yeah. And could you just go ahead and introduce yourself and tell the audience more about your background?
Yeah, sure. I think in a field like data science, where there's so many crazy ways to get into it, it's important to share the journey as well as where I am now. So I actually came from a pretty traditional background into data science. So I kind of academic background. I had my bachelor's in stats and math. I got my PhD in applied math, did a few years of postdoc research. Kind of after getting burnt out on applying for all the tenure track positions and worrying about that in my future, I had a friend reach out and he said, hey, there's a data science position in Kansas City, Missouri at this large electronic health record vendor. So basically the people that manage the data for a ton of hospitals. We worked on kind of basically anything you could with patient level, hospital level data, so like precision medicine, risk prediction for readmissions or adverse events like, acute kidney injuries, things that you might get in the hospital. And then things to, revenue cycle and hospital operations problems like patient throughput. So a great experience working from kind of end to end with hospital type data. I moved on as a principal data scientist at a contract research organization. So that sounds very dry. It's actually the kind of company that does the legwork and data management for clinical trials on behalf of kind of big pharma, big biotech like Pfizer or Johnson & Johnson. And now I am a director of data science at Anthem in their enterprise data science org. And the projects that I'm specifically responsible for are on the clinical side of our cognitive AI team. I know we'll talk about what cognitive AI means to me, hopefully here. Our work primarily focuses on just getting increasing automation and decreasing nurse and physician burden of reviewing what are called prior authorization requests. So just as some background, as I kind of drill into that more as we talk, prior authorization is basically the idea that for certain procedures, services, medications, in order for an insurer to pay for it, they need to make sure that this is one, medical necessity in cases of a lot of services or procedures. In case of medications, they want to make sure that those there's not a cheaper alternative that's biologically equivalent, and basically make sure we get the best value while still maintaining that highest level of care. And so yeah, that's kind of what I do. I'm overseeing the clinical umbrella under the cognitive AI team.
Yeah, so super interesting stuff you're working on with your company and your team right now. And so we're also going to be talking about cognitive AI today. And just for the audience that may not know what this is, could you please define this in your own words?
Yeah, so cognitive AI is kind of two sides of the same coin. It's a little different than training just a classifier model in machine learning. We're concerned with process automation or optimization. And so one thing we want to do is we want to be able to mimic those behaviors. In our case, again, those nurses and physicians who are going to be reviewing those prior authorization request forms. And in the end, we want to either provide decision support for them as they do their work to make things smoother. Or two, we just want to outright make automated decisions in cases where we're extremely sure that a request doesn't need to even go in front of a human. So cognitive AI to me, it's not simply about training a classifier given some final label, approve versus reject, say. It's more about understanding the processes and the reasoning that went into that decision and coming up with ways of representing the entire process as opposed to simple binary classifier. So just for some more background there, in our case, these request forms are kind of essentially faxed medical records, and they're kind of a mix of tables and basically prose, clinical notes. and those clinical notes come with all the variation, just as many physicians as there are different ways of abbreviating, of marking things down and proving that medical necessity, as well as just the fact that these request forms are scanned in, so there's all the different skew and issues you have to deal with there. So without any automation in place, these scans would just have to go in front of nurses or physicians who are trained in reviewing these requests, and they're trying to make decisions as quickly and as timely as they can on, is this procedure medically necessary, or is this a duplicate procedure or service that would make the one that I'm about to perform not covered under the insurance policy. So it's a super tough job without some help. So in the context of my work specifically, cognitive AI it means extracting information from that unstructured data to make that request process quicker and easier for everyone involved. So, that involves not only NLP techniques, but it involves cleaning up scans, performing OCR, so optical character recognition, as well as, doing the NLP and the machine learning down the line.
Yeah, definitely. So there's clearly a lot of different moving parts to the line of work that you're doing right now. And I'm glad that you also brought up the thought of NLP. And so that NLP is also known as natural language processing for the audience here. And how has this kind of impacted your industry specifically?
Well, I mean, it's the only reason that our cognitive AI team exists at Anthem. First of all, just as I mentioned before, there's just so much variability in the scans, the scanned medical records that get sent to us, just in terms of page layouts, ways that the provider chooses to present the case for necessity. And so we've really worked hard on building mappings between equivalent medical terms and abbreviations, which are huge in the healthcare industry. While we still have, but you have to balance that with understanding kind of the small semantic differences between really seemingly similar words, at least to me, who is not a trained nurse or physician. We have to still understand those small differences, and that's kind of a tough ask. So it's not something where we're going out and using a pre-cooked model trained on the Wikipedia corpus, for example. But we do have, in as far as NLP, we do have our own fine-tuned models that we've trained for a specific area called named entity recognition. And so this is basically, it's a nice way of saying, not only is this an important word, but what type of a word is it? Is this a medication? Is it a procedure? Is this unit that we're seeing a dosage or a unit of weight? Those kind of things. So trying to get towards more understanding of the contextual, the greater context there. And so on top of all those NLP models, we also, we have this longitudinal records. Hopefully people have been with Anthem for several years. And so every time we look at these requests, we can go back and say, well, let's look at member level and provider level details and try to extract some features out of that. For a provider, it might be if you're submitting an authorization request for a certain procedure, it could be a natural question to ask, well, what's the history with this provider and this procedure? Are they 100% of these requests approved or not? So you can get an idea of kind of what you expect in this process and how the nurses are going to start thinking about these problems. So, in terms of using all these details, we try to make a machine learning model that tries to predict whether or not this request will be approved in the end. And so if the model spits out and says we are exceedingly sure that this request will be approved, we're trying to limit those false positives here. We don't want a request to get approved, which shouldn't have been, because it's going to make us look bad later. If somebody were to come back and say, oh, actually, we deny that. So if we're very confident, we can automatically approve these requests. If not, we take this in front of nurses and physicians for their manual review that they would have done anyway. But the great thing about that is in training all of these NLP models, these NER, that named entity recognition model, when we put those documents in front of the nurse or the physician in their workflow, we have specific keyword highlighting that's based on the insurance policy in question, the insurance policy itself. So hyper-specific models that allow us to highlight keywords and create basically a Cliff Notes version of these documents that can range from 5 pages or 50 pages. So even if we can't approve a request, we're still helping to really greatly speed up that manual process here. That's kind of the overarching role of NLP in my world.
Yeah, absolutely. Great explanation. And with a lot of the work that you do with NLP and just cognitive AI in general, I'm sure there's a lot of challenges that might come up. And so, what do you think is the biggest challenge that you've had to encounter with the line of work that you have?
Yeah, beyond the kind of superfluous ones, the ones that I already mentioned. Okay, we get these scanned images and we have to do transformations and make that. And we think about how do we productionalize that. We need to make these things like the de-skewing or the removing of spurious lines and dots that can be in a scan. All those different pre-processing things are actually a huge chore for productionalization. When you talk about you want this to be real time, when a nurse or physician clicks on a document, you want that assessment to be made, those words to be highlighted and in front of you. But I'm kind of going to go a different way on it because it's something I've been thinking about a lot lately, and our organization has as well. I think the biggest challenge in really machine learning and AI that we see in healthcare. So I know it's health insurance, but it's really healthcare when we're thinking about is this patient, does this prior authorization request prove medical necessity? That's the actual process that's going into place that nurses and physicians have. And so we as data practitioners need to also treat it that way, that we're essentially proving or disproving medical necessity. And so there's so many concerns around that, around the approval or denial of claims. How do we ensure that we're building fair and equitable algorithms? So basically just the field of ethical AI, which is about it's as big as it ever has been. I think that's a huge problem for us, and not a problem, but an issue that we have to tackle every day that we come into work and build these things. So I'm on the Ethical AI Advisory Council at the Center for Practical Bioethics here in Kansas City. And so it's this group of data professionals, but there's also healthcare executives, bioinformatics professors from Duke and Johns Hopkins, and people that are ethicists. They have their PhD in philosophy, and their goal is to basically figure out a framework that we can recommend for whether it's companies or individual data practitioners, to make sure that the data they use to train models, first of all, but also the models themselves have fairness in mind from kind of end to end. There's obviously a lot of documented kind of issues in healthcare as far as race or gender, equitability in terms of the kind of care that people receive are concerned. And specifically here at Anthem, I've been able to kind of take away lessons from that advisory council, bring them to my day-to-day work. And as a greater, as I mentioned, we're in the enterprise data science organization. And so our leadership is really intent on developing an enterprise level strategy for things like bias mitigation and machine learning algorithms. So it's a super hard problem because there are about 500 people in the entire enterprise org, and we build machine learning models for a variety of use cases. So I've kind of highlighted the kind of main thing that my group deals with, but basically there's not a one size fits all way of dealing with all of these issues. And but what we're focused on is building this common playbook that everyone draws from the time we scope a problem. So gathering input, getting buy-in from executive leadership on these kind of bias mitigation issues, as well as just formalizing that final approach. It's kind of the biggest issue that's I've been tackling now.
Yeah, no, and it's great to hear that you're also involved with ethics AI and just that in general, because that's also a super important topic that I think not enough people talk about in working in industry right now. So that's great to hear that you're involved with that. And
Yeah.
my final question for you is regarding AI. And so, how do you think AI will be impacted in your industry in the coming years?
Yeah, and I think I view Anthem still as more maybe a healthcare company, but really they are health insurance, and so there are a lot of those ethical problems that and questions that we have to ask ourselves all the time that come from the healthcare end of things. But I think that if I say our insurance, if I say that our industry is insurance, then it kind of hits to the heart of cognitive AI and this kind of whole discussion of what we do. That I think insurance overall is a very process-based field. Um, so when we look at automating and optimizing, we're looking at understanding the full process that these people would take. Are there process improvements? It's another really tough question. Is just because you are training a model to mimic a current process doesn't answer the question of, is this the best process to take? So the amount of just the sheer amount of data in healthcare that we get that remains unstructured. So say clinical notes, for example, is huge, and really it contains, what we found is it contains so much more richness and information than the electronic health record could ever really hope to capture in the discrete fields that they store off in tables. So I think NLP AI, that's going to really help us continue to get meaningful information from that unstructured data, and we can use that to improve our processes kind of from end to end. And I highlighted a specific process I deal with and mentioned others, but there are people in our org tackling issues like fraud, waste, and abuse from providers, and those are terribly imbalanced problems here. We're not talking about some large network of fraudulent people, so you're talking about things that are very fractions of a percent prediction here, or there are things that we're just trying to make sure a patient who we can say, hey, from their medical record, we think you're likely to need a certain procedure, whether it's a knee or a hip replacement, whether it's whatever. Whether if you're likely to need some procedure within the next year, we want to make sure that, and as far as just Anthem and the insurance provider is concerned, that that patient knows all of her options as far as her in-network providers in her area. And we have groups that are working on actual precision medicine problems out in the Bay Area that are partnering with academic hospitals and publishing papers. So overall, I think just Anthem has invested a ton into AI in terms of talent and computing power. It's been a major strategic initiative for years for them, and it's on every slide deck that I see on future looking things. So I'm just happy to be a part of that kind of wave of AI innovation here in, frankly, a space where if you view it as insurance, I didn't know there was just so much that is clinical and very we have to be very precise, very careful around. I just thought it was kind of claims going in, approve or deny, but it's been a heck of a journey to kind of learn all the ways that we use AI here.
Yeah, no, that's great to hear. And it was so great to hear about your journey and all of your experiences today, JD. I wanted to say thank you so much for being on our show. And where can everyone find you online to connect with you?
Sure. Yeah, I don't do anything like write Medium articles or do things on YouTube, but you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm JD-Martindale on there. So.
Yeah, perfect. And to our audience, for more information on the data standard, you can find us at www.datastandard.io, as well as on our LinkedIn and YouTube channel. And thank you so much, JD, for joining us. It was so great to have you on the show and just hear about everything that you're working on. So thank you so much.
Thanks again, Kat.